and this beautiful globe of ours that you're joining us. Welcome, everybody, to another Stellenbosch Business Institute LeaderSHIFT series. This is a series which is a fireside conversation, high impact conversation that happens once a month, courtesy of the Stellenbosch Business Institute, where we really get to start engaging with some of our renowned global leaders in areas of leadership, of business, of global change, and finding pathways in which, of course, we can shift. My name is Faith Mangope, and it brings me an absolute honor and privilege to be hosting the Stellenbosch Business Institute Leadership Series with you once a month. And as always, this particular month, we've got a high impact conversation waiting for you. But if you've just joined us for the very first time, let's tell you a little bit about who we are. Well, the Stellenbosch Business Institute Leadership Institute conversations really are renowned as a catalyst for change and architects in consulting pathways and executive learning processes that augment the way that leaders think, that leaders shift, and also that the way that leaders adapt to a disruption or this disruptive future of ours. And so every single month we bring you high level, high impact conversations that will really augment the way that we really think about thinking. And as we shift likewise, obviously allowing the space for us to grow and integrate more. This morning or this afternoon for us is no different as the other Leadership Business Institute Leadership Series, because we are really privileged to have Michael Jackson join us. Yes, before you start thinking we're going to have a concert, no, it's not that kind of concert, but I bet you it's going to be equally as entertaining, because Michael Jackson stands out as an acclaimed and award-winning business speaker and facilitator. He's celebrated for being a forward thinker, as well as having a forward-thinking approach, as a specializing in demystifying the future of business. And of course, in a business world that evolves at a breakneck speed, Jackson is committed to providing timely and pertinent insight. And I tell you one thing, I've had the honor of speaking to Michael just before we actually engage with this series. And I tell you, when I say you're in for quite a treat this afternoon, you're really in for quite a treat. I do welcome and I do ask that please, during the conversation, may we all take a moment just to fill in your chat box. And in the chat box there, you've got some questions or comments if you've got for Michael. Please do take the time to fill them in so that we can keep the conversation as integrated and as inclusive as possible. I want us all to be given an opportunity to engage with Michael this afternoon, especially when it comes to insights and on businesses and where businesses are growing into, and also the welcoming of new technologies in that sense. So Michael, it's an absolute honor and a privilege to be with you this afternoon. Welcome, of course, to our LeaderSHIFT series. I cannot wait for you to share your insights, and it's great to have you as always.
What a pleasure to be with you all. A real joy. Thank you very much indeed. I'm just busy looking at the chat to see where everyone's coming in from all across South Africa at the moment, from Cape Town up to Joburg and everywhere in between by the look of it. It really is a pleasure to be with you this afternoon, and thank you very much indeed. I'm in the northwest of England, as I typed in the chat, and I've discovered now from living in the UK after living in South Africa for many years, the difference between summer and winter in the UK is that in the summer in the UK, the rain is warm. That's the only difference. Nothing else. But Faith, a pleasure to be with you.
Absolute pleasure to have you join us this afternoon, Michael. You know, before we get into, demystifying the future of business, especially when it comes to transformation, the way that we view businesses of the future, let's talk a little bit about Michael Jackson, the individual. Your background, what actually attributed to you going into the strategic business that you've been involved in, the people that you've met. I mean, having to meet the likes of the co-founder, for example, Steve Wozniak, is something that we can never take for granted. Having to work with the likes of Richard Branson, which I'm hoping that you will share during this conversation as well, is something that, we say just so flippantly, but the truth is, it really is something so significant. Just talk to us a little bit, though, about the background. Who is Michael? Apart from everything else, who is Michael?
My wife will tell you I've got a great face for radio, and that's about all. But my original background is UK. Born and bred in the northwest of England, and I was privileged to work in London in the advertising industry once I'd left university. And I think that from there, I was privileged to get a transfer out to South Africa to work with a large global advertising agency on a 2-year contract. They brought me out to SA to be the strategic director of marketing and communications predominantly. And what that meant was I had to do strategies with the clients so that we could soften them up. When the creative people threw the creative up on the wall, they'd understand what it looked like and what it meant and go, yes, we'll buy that. And I enjoyed South Africa so much. I stayed for 28 years rather than the 2 years that originally I was scheduled for. And that's because my creative director in that agency at the time said to me, why don't we stay on after the 2-year contract, open up our own shop and do things for ourselves? And we had an awful lot of fun doing it. And it was kind of by luck or design that, having got my own very small agency from being involved in a large global one, I got into the situation where I was privileged to meet some people from Virgin Atlantic. They said they were looking for an advertising agency in South Africa. And I said, well, funnily enough, I know one, pick me. And we ended up having a conversation. And because of that, I was privileged to end up working with Richard Branson for a couple of years, doing strategy with him and his team, and really planning some Virgin activities across Africa. And it was amazing. It was a really, really good time to be in business with him. And he is everything you've ever heard about. He's crazy, he's mad, he drinks like a fish, he's great fun, really humorous, but a really serious businessman. And he doesn't brook fools gladly. And I was delighted to have that honor of being with him. Although, what I should tell you, Faith, is that after what he said to me, I can never work with Richard Branson again.
What did he say to you?
He said, you're fired. And the reason was, I'd become very complacent. You know, when you're jetting around the world in upper class on Virgin and mixing with rock stars and celebrities and politicians and business leaders, you can automatically believe that you're very significant to the airline. And in fact, all I was fulfilling a role that they needed, but I didn't own shares. And the guy that controlled it was Richard himself. So the business went on to brighter, younger, better people than me, I guess. And I'm actually very okay about it. I don't really stay in touch with Richard that much, but I got an invite to dinner with him recently. And I can tell you I still enjoy him no matter what he said to me. But because of the Branson stuff, I think that the way South Africa was with the change at the time, you know, and we were all enamored of what was emerging and the hope that we all had from a South African perspective, that the world was beating a path to South Africa's shores, or Southern Africa's shores in particular. I notice we've got people on from Windhoek and further away today with us as well. Welcome to you. Because of the Branson thing, I ended up being asked to work for Richard Branson, for Bill Gates over at Microsoft. And I spent about 6 months shuttling backwards and forwards to Redmond outside Seattle to the Microsoft headquarters, planning strategy for Microsoft for Bill and his team at the time, some very influential business people there as well. You know, when you're good enough for Branson, when you're good enough for Mandela, when you're good enough for Gates, and I did work on 4 occasions with former President Nelson Mandela, who once called me a national treasure. I'm so proud of that. He wrote that in my personal inscription of my book that he has, The Long Walk to Freedom. And that's my most treasured possession ever. I think that, you know, we were all swept up, as myself and my partner were in business at the time, with all the opportunity that was there. One thing led to another, more and more business came in. My partner ultimately retired. And so at the time, I'd been doing a series of business presentations for a number of business people around the world. And I realized you could do it full time. When Branson had asked me to do the change presentation, which was one of the first things I wrote that wasn't directly involved in our business, I got hooked on that subject. And change has just become something that I absolutely adore. And I've spent the rest of my career, now some 3,000 conferences plus, presenting on change around the world. And I've had a very good time doing it, and I thoroughly enjoy it.
Well, Michael, I love the fact that you've already brought up the subject for this afternoon's conversation. And I want us to zero in on the concept of change, especially in the way in which we do business today. You know, business is not done in the way that it was in the 1970s or 1990s, for that matter, especially when it comes to 2024 and the introduction of new technologies such as artificial intelligence. And a lot of times we speak about this change, but I think a lot of leaders are feeling as though the change can be somewhat overwhelming because we do not fully understand what change comes with or what it actually brings on the table. Talk to us a little bit about this concept of change and the introduction of new technologies to force change or to encourage change, because I believe that if you don't jump on the train, you get left behind. And many of us are feeling as though, do I jump on the train? And what does this train actually mean? And where is it going? Or do I get left behind? Let's zero in a little bit about this concept of change, especially with the introduction of technologies and technologies such as artificial intelligence, blockchain, you name it.
It's coming at us thick and fast. We're seeing more change now in our lifetimes than any other human beings who've ever lived in the history of the planet. And the significance of the speed of change and the world that it's dragged us into, Faith, is a world of complex adaptability. And what I mean by that is that powerful market shifts have taken place, are taking place, and will take place into the future. And what that means in simple terms is that who we are, what we are, why we are, and where we engage today is very, very different to anything that's gone before. And I think people struggle with it because we're not really good in human terms at responding well to change. Our brains are programmed automatically to make sure that we have that adrenaline rush with a fight or flight reflex if something looks a little bit dangerous. And we tend to run from change because we have this fear of the unknown. But what's going to take place, I believe, between now, the middle of 2024, and the balance of this decade is going to be absolutely almost unimaginable. And I think that there's a great quote from Elon Musk, and he's a famous ex-South African at that level as well. He said just a few weeks ago on the 9th of April, he said, and I love the way Elon speaks, he just lays it out the way it is. He said, things are going to get weird, and they're going to get weird pretty damn fast. That's the world of complex adaptability. And here's one of the men, as one of the co-founders originally of OpenAI, in full dispute right now with Sam Altman as the managing director of OpenAI, thinking about the direction of where that technology takes us. I just think that what it means, and we'll talk about AI in some detail a bit later if we may, but I think what it means right now is that we struggle to change naturally. We're focused too much on old business practice, looking in the rear view mirror. We're not concentrating on staring through the front windscreen enough. And what we need to be is taking a very holistic approach of the vehicle that we're in, the organization that you're representing, what you're doing behind the wheel if you're driving that business forward, into what really is some very rugged 4x4 unknown territory. And yes, you might have technology, you might have a sat nav, but have you got the right map? Do you know how to create the map? I think that when you look at very successful business people, and very recently, we've seen a complete shift in the Fortune 500. The top 500 businesses in the world today are very, very different to what they were in, let's say, the 70s or the 80s or the 90s that you've previously mentioned. Let me give you a quote from Reed Hastings, the CEO of Netflix in 2017. Now, Netflix at the time, a technology riding the wave. Everybody wanted to be in subscription television. What did Reed Hastings say in I think it was April 2017? He said, our only competitor is sleep, because he believed he was in a gem of a business that was totally unique, that would literally allow them to steamroll their way through the industry of television and media and not have anyone to worry about. Well, let me tell you now, Netflix today, June 2024, has got about 269 million subscribers today, give or take a couple of 100,000. 269 million. Now, this is the guy who less than 10 years ago said, I think the only competitor we have is sleep. Well, today, there's Amazon Prime with 200 million subscribers on their own, Prime Video. HBO, or Max as it's being called, 153 million. Disney Plus, just on 100 million, 99 million plus at the moment, and Paramount at 74 million subscribers. They are double the size combined of Netflix. And just a few years back, I think he said the only competitor we have is sleep. The storm of transformation that we're facing has got to keep all of us awake at night. We've got to start focusing on where we're going, what we're doing, what destinations we're driving into. And I will tell you categorically that old-fashioned businesses are seeing their market spaces crumble. They're giving way to young upstarts. And you might even term Netflix an old-fashioned business coming from its peak of just over 10 years ago. I think, we're seeing a change that is quite dramatic. And that means that if you're making leadership choices right now or taking organizational decisions, it has become more difficult than at any other time in history. We're wandering through a maze almost, where we're absolutely struggling to keep abreast of what is going on. So if I may, then we keep going on that change scenario, if I can think about it. We always expect that when we see change happening, the end result should always be a little bit higher up the curve. So change, end result, you want to go upwards. But what we do as humans is we go through this range of negative emotions that takes us through this learning curve, which by the time we get from change to the end result, we've driven through this huge U-shaped canyon of doubt, of negativity, of all sorts of things. When we hear change, we go, oh God, I'm not interested. I'd rather not have it. I'd deny it. Your brain's reflexes kicking in. From denial, you move down this slippery slope, moving away from change into things like anger. I never asked for this change. I don't want it. And that anger masks a little bit of fear. And that's kind of like, you can feel that in the pit of your stomach. You can taste it in the back of your mouth. And maybe you'll get to the stage at the base of that U-shaped canyon where you go, I didn't want it. I'm walking away from it. I deny it. It's only when our brains deal with all the negativity and the really bad emotions surrounding change that can we start to see an uptick, where we start to see a little bit of progress, belief, a little bit of hope. And finally, when we get to the point where the end result is, and it's taken us 3 times longer than it would in a straight line to get there, finally, in that sun shining moment, we go, I always knew we'd get there. I said that right from the get-go. The difference in winning businesses today is they're flattening their own change curve. They're going from A to Z as quickly as they possibly can. Still going through the same machinations because our brains all work the same way, but recognizing them for what they are and saying we have to do things faster and differently. We need to see business in brand new eyes that we've never seen before. And there is no rule book apart from what you see around you and the maps you create for yourself. Gosh, I'm going on a bit there, Faith.
I know. I love the fact that you're describing it so aptly as well, Michael. And I want to just deep dive into these concepts as you've mentioned. So where we're sitting right now, let's take South Africa, for example. South Africa is in itself a developing economy. A lot of the businesses that contribute significantly to GDP are businesses in the mining, manufacturing, agricultural space, right? Space is
Yes.
fintech as well, so financial services as well contribute significantly. But what we're also seeing in those businesses is that they're very traditional businesses. You'd often see in the South African context, or many developing economies, particularly on the African continent, that the businesses were started, let's say, 100 years ago, or 50 years ago, or 80 years ago. These are the businesses that have withstood the test of time, so as it were. The smaller businesses or the startup, more innovative businesses are struggling a little bit under the guise of perhaps barriers to entry. And we'll talk a little bit about that down the line, but barriers to entry, being able to have the environment that is conducive enough for them to actually thrive. But the ones that are more established, the traditional form of businesses, the businesses that have got hierarchy, the businesses that have got the CEO, the managing director, not to sound ageist, who's 65 years old, and the CEO who's 55 years old, and then middle management, and then obviously to the lower management. We're seeing that those are the businesses that contribute in these developing economies. And we're saying that change is coming, and change is coming fast. How do those traditional businesses augment so that they are relevant for the time that we're in, but also start looking at the introduction of new businesses and new thinking and fresh thinking so that we don't die? I often say, if you're not relevant, you either die or you survive. So how then do we start, consolidating on one side these new businesses that are coming in with ideas, but perhaps barriers to entries, and the traditional businesses that have been there for long sets of time, but now need the change?
Okay, so legacy businesses do have a problem. And when you look at, and again, it's not being ageist, but when you think about a managing director who's more in common with what went down in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, and 70s than they are that what went down in the decades of the 10s, the 20s, and what's coming at us in the 30s, we need to wake up and smell the coffee here. I think that a business life cycle used to be one S-curve. You'd start your business, you'd grow, you'd have growth, you'd reach maturity. And depending on how long you could sustain that maturity, you'd eventually drift off into obsolescence. A simple S-curve of business, if you would. Most legacy businesses grew up seeing one S-curve happen in their lifetimes, from startup to growth to maturity to a great deal quicker, because the S-curve is coming at you now in literally 2 to 3 year segments. So you go through a startup, you reach maturity much, much quicker because of the sheer rate of knots of competitive positioning with what's going on around you in the marketplace. You'll reach that peak of maturity in 3 years or less, not decades. And what you need to be, the winners have realized that by the time you're growing in maturity, you need to be predicting the next S curve, what you can hook onto that's going to give you further growth in the next cycle, the next S curve beyond that, and how we grow it. So you can call it, in many respects, thinking ahead of the curve, because when traditionally businesses only dealt with one curve at a time, now we're having to deal with multiple futures at the same time. So we've got to think fast, and we've got to be agile in our approach. So if you think about a traditional business, the old hierarchical pyramid, I'm sure there'll be people watching us today who are involved in a business at that level. You've got a CEO at the top, and you've got middle management on the way down to supervisors to the boots on the ground. Think about where that shape, that hierarchy, that pyramid came from. And I'm going to take you back about 250 years when it was born, because when the Industrial Revolution first occurred across our planet, businesses had to be formed of lots of people working together on the same things. The only rule book that people could look into for shaping those amount of people working in one place was found in the rearview mirror. And the only thing we'd ever handled on that scale before was the military. And we've had military because we fought each other since the dawn of time. We've had a military all over the world. A general at the top, various degrees of management to the boots on the ground. And the word company, by the way, that we often use in terms of business is one of those original military terms. It means, as it was then, a group of men engaged in military formation, a company, and we still have the same stuff 250 years on. Now, we've got to start thinking about what that means, that rigidity, those fixed, established, what are consistent and familiar style levels of operation, and ask yourself if they're ready for where we find ourselves now towards the end of the decade. And what I'm seeing from winning businesses around the world is a different shape emerging. You can't blow the hierarchy away instantly because it's been entrenched for over 250 years. But a new shape thinking is emerging, and we'll call it more of a holocratic principle. Think of an organic supercell, if you will, with things moving around the cell that are much more fluid, that are much more loose, more organic, less job description, more profiling and positioning of people doing projects rather than jobs, thinking about handling work and things differently. But you don't just change a hierarchical company into a holocratic company overnight. There are some good examples of what legacy businesses have done, and we can see those around us all the time now. Mercedes-Benz, for example. You think about a rigid German auto manufacturer. I believe there are some people on from BMW. Hello to you this afternoon as well. Think about your own structure. Now, what what Mercedes-Benz have got to do is change with the times. They need to think about the new automotive industry, as every major car manufacturer does. And I mentioned Chinese coming in. My goodness, the marketplace is shifting with Chinese automobile manufacturers, soon to be the biggest supplier of electric vehicles in the UK, by the way. That process has already begun. But Mercedes-Benz, well, they're a German, very rigid hierarchical organization. So they developed an offshoot. You can go and look this up on the web. It's called Mercedes-Benz.io. And what they are is an organization, if you will, an internet organization that drives Mercedes-Benz's future transformation. It operates very holocratically, like a supercell. They work on projects. They don't have fixed job descriptions. They float around inside that organization, and their output is fed back in to the hierarchical organization to say, we can give you a new future because we can think, and instead of outside of the box, I'm going to say outside of the pyramid. And that's a very, very cool thing. The people inside Mercedes-Benz IO have ownership of their own business. They have purpose within it. They challenge themselves daily, and they're highly collaborative, working amongst themselves. There's another great example of that. Airbus. We think about Airbus. Wow. Now, Airbus and Boeing have existed side by side as competitors since aviation took off, literally. What do? You build aircraft. You build the best aircraft that you can, and you fight at the aircraft shows for your orders, and you've only got one competitor, Airbus. Well, you haven't, because the Chinese are about to enter the aviation market, building aircraft that look identical to 787s from Boeing, that look identical to Airbus 340s. They are almost incredibly the same, but they're meant to be better from a Chinese perspective. So a third player has entered the mix. Now, if you're a traditional hierarchical organization that's only ever dealt with one competitor, how do you respond? Well, I know what Airbus are doing. They've built another preferred option for themselves in terms of a holocratic business. They've said, we're going to still duke it out amongst the aviation plane manufacturing business, but we're launching a company which they've now successfully run around the world called Airbus Protect, because they've figured out inside that hierarchical organization, they've got experts on safety, they've got experts on cybersecurity, they've got experts on sustainability. And what they're doing is they're offshooting some of those experts with all of their experience into Airbus Protect, so they can now go and sell that experience, not a hard product, a soft skill product, into a marketplace that literally allows Airbus to expand its business and grow, rather than just standing and duking it out with another airline manufacturer or aircraft manufacturer at that level. It's wild. And what that comes from is the ability to look into the future, because we need to be agile if we're driving business change. We need to be flexible in terms of our culture and our approach in a fast-moving world. We need to embrace technology, as you've mentioned, because technology enables knowledge transfer, and we need to drive purpose, building our own new stories and our new strategies that take you into a marketplace that goes into the future. Am I rambling on here?
No, you're teaching, which is, I think, everybody gets to benefit from some of the lessons. And I mean, this is such a conversation that is needed at this particular time, as businesses are trying to navigate this pathway, which is quite uncertain, quite unknown, very new, and in many instances can be very intimidating if we do not have the guidance, or at least have the community, so as it were, who are equally going through similar experiences and therefore get to bounce off of each other. So we really do appreciate it. I've got questions, Michael. So allow me to field some of those questions and comments as well that are coming in from our guests this afternoon. Please, if you do have a comment or if you do have a question for Michael, won't you just put it into the chat box, and then we'll make sure that that particular question reaches Michael so that he can answer. Lucas is saying the Mercedes transformation team, is that similar to agile teams that technology companies are rolling out in recent times? The Mercedes transformation team, is that similar to agile teams that technology companies are rolling out in recent times? That's from Lucas. I don't know if you can take one more question, Michael, and then you'll answer those, and then we'll see how we get to the next one. And then the second question coming in from Ndogozo Mahlangu saying, Michael, I like the idea of a holocratic organizational structure. Maybe deep dive, especially when it comes to a holocratic organizational structure, in terms of what does it mean, and navigating that terminology as well, Michael.
Well, holocratic stuff is a new base business, and the Mercedes transformation team, in the same vein, is very similar to the agile teams that technology companies are rolling out. And I see a further question from Lucas further down. How do people get paid in that kind of thing? How do they get compensated? Well, predominantly, they're not paid on a job description basis. They're not paid on salary banding. They're paid on project delivery. So they work to a project and they have an outcome that's quoted against a project, and they'll get remunerated based on the value of where that project lies. So that holocratic structure is very modern. It needs to be blended back into that organizational, hierarchical, rigid structure that many of us know and we all grew up with. But it certainly is the way forward. And I think that, when you look at the way SpaceX is running, by the way, with Elon Musk, or you look at the way leading organizations of the time are now trying to structure, they're all pretty much going for this project-driven, very loosely formed, organic style of business to overcome the limitations that hierarchical business gives you. And again, when you're in that hierarchical business, what happens is, you're blinkered in terms of where you come from. You think about your role going up the stage and going up the ladder, rather than working on a project by project basis. And let's face it, what happens is our experiences that we experience in life become our beliefs. And those beliefs become repetitive behaviors. We do them over and over again because it's safe, it's fine. And that means that our results, if you're looking at that in the pyramid, from your experiences to your beliefs, to your repetitive behaviors, your results tend to be just a little peak of that pyramid and not terribly large. What holocratic business is doing, and the style of it, is saying, let's take fresh experiences, let's take fresh beliefs, let's look for different answers, and from that create a massive amount of new behaviors and new actions. So it's a very much clearly defined pyramid, if you think, in a new way. And what you need to look at there is the cone of strategic plausibility, which is a well-known strategic thought process. Peter Drucker way back said the best way to create the future is to predict the future is to create it. And this cone of strategic plausibility, when you're looking forward, instead of looking through the narrow confines of where you are, which will likely give you a probable outcome, but even so, that doesn't necessarily work in a world that changes remarkably fast, is that you can stretch your view, stretch your thinking, challenge yourselves to come up with something that is more possibly plausible, something that you would prefer to go for because it will change the shape of your business. And somewhere beyond the realm of normal vision, in terms of what's plausible, is a preferred version of where your business should go into the future. There are great examples of that. I mean, the preferred option really was Mercedes-Benz.io or Airbus. But if you go as a wild card, if you're thinking by going beyond the rules of any conventional thinking whatsoever, where you're tracking almost with a Hubble telescope, something that is so far off and unusual, that's rare, but it still happens in this day and age. And a great example of that is in Saudi Arabia right now. Saudi Arabia dominates the world's oil output. Well, not for much longer, because peak oil, many people think peak oil has already been reached right now. But Saudi Arabia reckons that 2030 is peak oil, and they've got a vision, 2030. They're thinking so far out of the box, they've gone crazy. And what you should look up is something called NEOM, N-E-O-M. If you don't know about it already, go and look up NEOM. There's some really cool stuff in it. What Saudi Arabia is changing is the very nature of itself. They're dedicating some 26,500 square kilometers of land. And what they're building is NEOM, the city, the line, if you will, that's going to be, I think it's 170 kilometers long, 500 meters wide, and is expected by 2030 to be the home of around 4 million people. They originally thought 10 million, but they're building with construction work at the moment. And when have you ever seen a construction team come in on time, right? So the deadline's fallen back a little beyond 2030, but ground is broken. Within that 26,500 kilometers, the world's best tourist resort. How about snow skiing in Saudi Arabia? They're rewilding Saudi Arabia, this 26,500 square bit of land, and they're rewilding it to have tourist resorts of all different types, a global trade hub as a free port, and literally a floating industrial complex off its shores that will soon do for cargo, and we all know how important that is. It'll soon do for cargo what Emirates and Qatar Airways did for the UAE and Qatar respectively. Go and have a look at NEOM. That's such a wild card. It's unbelievable. But you see, what happens with limited blinkered thinking is that you have a past. We look in that rearview mirror way too often. It's that small for a reason, folks. The big windscreen in the future is still ahead of you. You look at your present. You go, well, I understand where things are a little bit at the moment. I know, I'll get an idea from the past, modify it a bit for my present, and that should give me the future I expect. Well, it often doesn't, because our world is shifting so quickly right now. It gives you a future that you didn't expect, and you find you lose time rather than gain advantage. Instead of looking too much into the past, think about where you are in the present right now and throw open the cone of strategic plausibility. Challenge yourself to create new futures for yourself based on what's out there, what you can potentially imagine and change yourself into. It's hard. It's not the easiest thing in the world, but that's what winning organizations are doing right now. It's amazing.
Michael, I'm going to stay on that theme around the rear view mirror being small and the mirror ahead of you showing a much bigger picture. I can imagine, leaders listening into this conversation are thinking, Michael, I hear you. Not only is it hard, but what if it doesn't work? The ramifications of failure are very expensive, especially when it comes to businesses, developing economies, and the responsibilities that are attached to such. So how then do we start navigating pathways that are very different and very complex as it is, disruptive in their very nature, but also pose, a threat that if you do not align yourself with right strategic or smart strategic frameworks, it could blow up in your face, if I'm being ever so eloquent
Yeah,
about the term. What happens if it doesn't work? What happens if I
it
fail? What
sounds like
happens if that?
your fear there. You see, what happens if I move and I
Yeah.
fail? Well, what happens if you don't move and you die? Because that will happen. I guarantee you that right now. When you're thinking about the changing nature of the world, right? You've got to, in this day and age, with the pace of life, with the pace of things that are going on around us, you've got to move fast to create impact. Doing what you've always done is no guarantee of success. It's probably a guaranteed death. You've got to live in the future. You've got to focus long term. And long term is the next 3 years, the next 6 years, the next 9 years. What are you going to do? You've got to show respect to where you've came from, but you've got to be direct to build awesome things, to think about it. And it's funny that I've used those 5 phrases because that's what Zuckerberg challenges his people to do inside his organization. That they want to build a powerful community inside Meta. They know that the way they're going to do it is to move fast, to live in the future, to focus long term, to show respect and be direct, and to build awesome things by challenging themselves. And what they challenge themselves to do is be obsessed by the customer. Be focused on your communities around you. Make sure that you're the right cultural fit. Use the data. Data is your new oil. Data is nothing on its own, but it is the new oil of the future. The Economist magazine said that back in 2015. And you've got to have purpose, and you've got to work towards that to uncover your secret sauce that helps you empower a tomorrow for all of you inside the organization. And that means you've got to be connected to new ideas. You've got to support them. You've got to challenge yourself. You've got to bring in the best people. You know that old phrase, if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. Go find a new one where you aren't. You've got to have ideas, people, behaviors that generate new vision, that show you a route to growth, because the alternative rather, is total failure. And that means death, because doing what you've always done is not going to work. And I think that what you need to do is find yourself into a new form of organization where you're looking to align your values that you've got with the mission that you try to set for yourself, and put that up against where you find yourself in business, and say, I'm going to challenge myself to try and deliver something that really does work in a very, very powerful sense, that literally works on my culture, my experience, my strategy, all of those things, and starts to deliver on behalf of everybody. We need to be leaders. We need to be pioneers. We need to have teams, and we need to trust the people around us. The secret sauce is there, but you've got to find your unique ingredients for it.
I've got another comment from Lucas, and I love how interactive Lucas is. Please, I do encourage you all to be equally as interactive with us this afternoon. We literally got about 5 or so minutes before we have to wrap it up. But Lucas said it'll be very interesting to see how hierarchical organizations transform into the holocratic organizations. This, I suspect, requires redefining of the new organizational culture, including organizational overhaul. I actually want to build from what Lucas is saying, Michael, in bringing organization, how do we transform new organizational culture, including organizational overhaul, and marry it with what you were saying a bit earlier on about trusting your team and trusting those that are in the organizations to take you through this pathway of uncertainty and of change. How then do we start strategically selecting right team members? And for some of us who are in organizations where you already have the team there, but the team may not necessarily be the team that is the team for the future, how then do we start having those difficult conversations, especially around this will work, this works for now, but this team will not work in 3 years' time or 5 years' time, because I think I would imagine a lot of businesses need to start having the conversations around, is this team the team that will be profitable in the next 5 years?
You grow a new team while you're literally working with your existing team, and there'll be a process of natural selection that comes through. I think that, holocracy will not change hierarchies overnight, the traditional hierarchical pyramid. It will take the next 8-9 years for it to become more of the norm. So you've got to look at the structure of your alignment within your business. Is it aligned to new future values? Is it aligned to your mission, your purpose, your DNA? And you've got to start asking some tough questions of everyone. How do you show up? How do we play with strategy and structure? Who are we? How do we work together better? Because some people who are more predisposed to this can guide and lead others into new cultures and to new experiences. But it's a question of your organization wanting to change, your leaders wanting to change that organization from within, and the teams of people that evolve quite naturally into those positions. Not everyone's born to lead, but some people are born to follow. And if you mix them together, it works incredibly well. I just wanted to throw in very quickly about that I recently came back from Zimbabwe. I had to speak to 400 agricultural animal producers, the biggest 400 farmers, if you will, in Zimbabwe. Incredibly nervous. What do you do to say to those people about change? And what I realized was, in my research as to what they were all doing, was that they were still looking back in the rearview mirror and blaming what had happened in the past, instead of saying, here we are in Africa, let's take a brand new, unique approach. Let's build a new standard with what we have and how we do it. That means we think entirely different and we forge a new destiny for ourselves. Let's not lick the wounds of the past. Let's keep moving forward. And you in South Africa know all about that all too well as well. The past is a foreign country. We're now in a new world, and it's up to us to come up with our own scenarios, or else we'll go down the pipes.
I'm looking at the time, it's about 44 minutes after 4 o'clock, which means that the time has certainly flown by with us. But, Michael, as we close off this session, and I think you've given us so much insight and so much depth to think about, especially around how do we prepare for the next, and how do we start, preparing ourselves for the next, so as it were. Some parting ideas in terms of getting practical around literally embracing and demystifying the future of business and being able to transform likewise. How do we get practical in it?
There's a quote from Bill Gates that says people tend to overestimate the amount of change happening in the next 10 years, but they underestimate the amount of change that's going to take place in the next 10 years, but they overestimate the amount of change that's happening in the next 2. You've got time to breathe on this. You've got time to think about it, to start approaching, start looking into the future, start looking at what makes the modern winning organizations work, and you'll get some clues from within that overall structure. Start with the top 5 organizations in the world and see what they're doing differently. I wish we had more time. Wow.
I really do as well. Time certainly went really fast, but I'm hoping that this kind of gives you a little bit of a reason for you to come back, so as it were, so that we can continue this conversation. As I said, very insightful, and I think you've given us something to all think about in terms of applying change or applying the tools of change within our different organizational structures. So I do thank you, Michael, for joining us this evening or this afternoon. It'll be fantastic. It's been a fantastic time actually with you as well. And this is how it goes every single month, courtesy of the Stellenbosch Business Institute, as we introduce to you different renowned leaders, authors, who are all providing their insights in terms of navigating this leadership journey and assisting us in showing up in the most authentic manner in this diverse, agile world that we all need to adapt to, particularly as leaders. Do join us, of course, again. The next one will be happening on the 29th of July, and we'll be joined by the author of The World's Best Bank, that is Robin Speckland, who is launching his brand new book, implement. It's going to be another treat for us all. Do not fret though, we've also got the link of this particular session that we will be sharing with you all. So do join us as well, and you get to look back and reflect on the conversations that we've been having together. But for myself, as well as Michael, as well as the SBI team, thank you once again for being a part of the conversation. Until we talk again, bye-bye.